My name's Sophie Hughes. I'm a literary translator from Spanish. This is Hurricane Season. It's a novel that I recently translated into English. It's by Fernanda Melchor from Mexico. It's been published by New Directions in the US and by Fitzcarraldo editions in the UK. I'm going to read a section of the novel today, so I thought I would explain, give you an idea of what comes before it. The novel opens with the death of a witch, of a woman known locally as the witch. She's a woman who is revered and reviled in this local town in Mexico. She provides solutions and solace to many of the women whose lives are, by all accounts, incredibly difficult living in this destitute town. She also provides solace in another form to the men for whom she puts on alcohol and drug-fueled parties. It's a town where vice is rife, where poverty is rife, and superstition is also rife. So the novel tries to reveal to us what happened to this woman, not only how the murder itself occurred, but the reasons, the motives that led to the murder itself. This novel contains two witches. One is the old witch, and the other one is the young witch. The young witch has died at the beginning of the novel. We're about to hear what the local women believe was the cause of the death of the old witch. So this is some time before. And it gives you a taste of the kind of hearsay and superstition that really drives the narrative, the rolling narrative, the sort of breathlessness of the prose, which has very few full stops and actually no paragraph breaks in it. So the local women believe that the old witch died for making the town's men sterile and weak with her dark dealings, with her black magic, and above all, for having plucked so many seeds, rightfully planted there from the bellies of bad women, dissolving them in the poison that she brewed for anyone who asked, and the recipe for which she passed down to the girl in the days leading up to the landslide of '78, when the whole region was on lockdown as the hurricane hit the coast with bitter, thunderous force. And day after day, rumbling storm clouds pumped the sky with water, inundating the fields and rotting everything, drowning the animals that, blindsided by the gale and the thunder, couldn't escape their pens in time, drowning even some children, the ones no one scooped up quickly enough when the hillside broke away and came crashing down in a tumult of rocks and uprooted oak trees and a black sludge that swamped everything in its path, eventually spilling out onto the coast, but only after having converted 2/3 of the town into a graveyard before the tearful, bloodshot eyes of those who'd survived. Thanks to the mango trees that they'd managed to hold on to when the water rushed in, and they'd held on like that for days, clinging to the branches until the soldiers came and heaved them onto their boats, just as soon as that squall had worn itself out, having already ripped through the Sierra, at which point the sun reappeared from behind the grey clouds and the land started to congeal again, and the people, soaked to the bone, their skin covered in lichen like infinitesimal corals, arrived en masse in Villa Garbosa, livestock and surviving children in tow, seeking refuge wherever the government would put them. The basement of a town hall, the church vestibule, even the local school suspended classes for weeks to accommodate them. These people and all their crap, their whining and their lists of dead and missing persons, among whom the witch and her accursed daughter were counted, because nobody had seen hide nor hair of them after the storm. It wasn't until weeks later that the girl appeared one morning on the streets of Villa, dressed head to toe in black, her socks as black as the hair on her legs, as black as the long-sleeved blouse, as black as her skirt and high heels, and the veil she clipped with grips to the bun of long dark hair perched on the crown of her head. And the sight of her left everyone speechless. Whether out of disgust or amusement, it was impossible to say, dumbfounded by the ridiculous figure she cut. In the brain-frying heat, here was that weirdo dressed in black. She must be mad, just ridiculous. A real sight, like those cross-dressers who, every year without fail, showed up at the Villa Carnival, although no one dared laugh in her face because more than a few others had lost loved ones during that time. And on seeing the girl dressed up like that, on seeing her sunken, solemn gait as she dragged her feet towards the market, they knew the other one had died. the mother, the old witch, gone from this world, surely buried in the mire that had swallowed half the town. An ugly death, and yet still better than she deserved, some thought, given the life of sin and simony she'd led. Then nobody, not even the women, not even they, the regulars, the Friday callers, had the nerve to ask the bereaved girl what would happen with the business, who would take over the cures, the magic, and it would be years before people started returning to that house among the cane fields. Whole years in which La Matosa was slowly dotted once more with shacks and shanties, raised on the bones of those who'd been crushed under the hillside, repopulated by outsiders, most of them lured by the promise of work, construction of the new highway that was to run right through Villa and connect both the port and the capital to the recently discovered oil wells north of town, up in Palagacho. Enough work for fondas and food stalls to start cropping up, and in time even cantinas, guest houses, whorehouses and strip clubs where the truckers, the travelling tradesmen and the day labourers would stop and take a moment from the monotony of that road flanked on either sides by cane fields. Cane and pastures and reeds filling every inch of land for miles and miles in every direction, from the very edge of the road to the low slopes of the Sierra to the west, or running eastwards to the coast, to its eternally raging waters. Brush and more squat brush, covered in vines that grew with rapacious speed during the rainy season and threatened to overwhelm homes and crops alike, and which the men kept at bay with their machetes, stooped at the side of the road, or on the banks of the river, or in the furrowed fields, their feet plunged inside the hot earth, some of them too focused or too proud to pay any mind to the rueful glances thrown their way from afar, from the dirt track, to that black-clad spectre who spent her time haunting the remotest parts of town, the plots where crews of new boys, the new recruits, paid peanuts, toiled, smooth-faced and supple as rope, the muscles on their arms, legs and stomachs wrung out from the grueling labour and the scorching sun, and chasing after a rag ball on the local football pitch come evening, and their frenzied races to see who would be the first to reach the water pump, the first to dive into the river, the first to find a coin thrown from the river bank, who could spit the furthest while straddling the trunk of the fig tree suspended over the warm dusk waters, hollering and hooting, toned legs swinging in unison, shoulders all touching in a row, backs lustrous like buffed leather, shiny and dark like the seeds of a tamarind, or creamy like dulce de leche, or the tender pulp of a ripe zaporilla. Skin the colour of cinnamon, of mahogany and rosewood, skin glistening, wet and alive, which from afar, from that tree trunk several yards away where the witch spied on them, appeared smooth, taut and firm like the tart flesh of unripened fruit, the most irresistible kind, her favourite, the kind she begged for in silence, focusing the full force of her desire in her piercing black gaze, but remaining either hidden in the undergrowth or paralysed with longing at the edge of those fields, her shopping bags hanging from her arms and her eyes moist from the sheer beauty of all that scintillating flesh, her veil raised in order to see them better, smell them better, taste, in her imagination, the brackish scent of those young men wafting in the air around the plains, carried along by the breeze that made the leaves on the sugar-cane rustle, just like the frayed edges of their straw hats, the tips of their colourful handkerchiefs and the flames that lashed through the cane fields, pulverising the withered December scrub, reducing them to dust. The breeze that, come holy innocents, would start to smell of burnt caramel, of scorched earth, and that seemed to usher the slow roll of the last trucks loaded up with immense bales of blackened cane, which disappeared in the direction of the mill under that grey sky, when at last the boys could put away their machetes, not even rinsing them first, and rush to the highway to burn their wages, money earned with the sweat and every fibre of their aching bodies. And between great glugs of tepid beer pulled from Sara Juana's ancient fridge that rattled over the tumpa-tumpa of the combia, all of them seated around a plastic table, they would go over the events of the previous weeks, and sometimes they even all agreed that they'd glimpsed her from afar, or one of them might have even bumped into her on some side track, although those kids didn't know her as the young witch, but as simply the witch, and in their innocence and youth they confused her with the older one, the witch, and attributed to her, to the girl, all those blood-curdling stories that the townswomen used to tell them when they were kids. Stories about La Llorona, the weeping woman who drowned all of her offspring in a vile killing spree and was condemned for the rest of eternity to roam the earth as a ghastly apparition with the face of an angry mule and hairy spider legs, lamenting and bewailing her foul sin. Or the story of La Niña de Blanco, the ghostly little girl who appears when you disobey your grandmother and slip out of the house at night, or who follows you and, when you're least expecting it, calls your name, making you turn around, only to die of shock on seeing her pallid, skeletal face. And in their minds, the witch was little like that, only infinitely more exciting because she existed in real life, a real flesh and blood person who would walk around the Villa Market, greeting the vendors, not like that hocus-pocus bullshit their big-mouthed grandmas and mothers and aunts rattled off, and all to dissuade them from going out, when those boys were only after a good time, when they only wanted to get out of the house and have a laugh, fuck with the drunken dumbasses, and try their luck with the easy girls. Bullshit, she's a witch, they all agreed. The ugly skank just wants some cock. Some smart ass would joke, as if the witch wants to come suck me off, she could start right here, another would say, clutching his balls. And between the wind-ups, the sniggers, the burps, the thumps on the table, and the laughter, which was really more like yowling, there wasn't a thug among them who didn't sit there thinking, with all her land and all her money supposedly stashed away in chests, the sacks of gold coins, the riches, that witch from the cane fields could well afford the luxury of paying them for what they gave away free to the girls in town, or to the odd lost sheep asking for it, right? No one knew for sure who was the first to try, the first one to pluck up the courage to head out into the darkness and all the way to that shitty dump of a house, taking care not to be seen as he stood before the gate, before the kitchen door that swung open to reveal the figure of a very tall, scraggy woman, a set of keys jangling in her big hands like pale palm leaves, like lunar crabs poking out from the black sleeves of that tunic which seemed in the darkness to hover above the ground. And the glistening hot coals firing the cauldron gave off the faintest of glows, but filled the kitchen with the stench of camphor, which lingered for days in the hair of the boys who were brave enough to go there, driven either by ambition or adrenaline, by morbid curiosity or necessity, to fool around with the shadow who would wait for them each night, quivering. They would get it over with as fast as they could before scampering back down the dirt track and through the fields until they reached the highway, back to the safety of Sara Juana's, where the money that the shadowy figure had slipped into their pocket, when at last she'd let them leave, would be spent on lukewarm beer. I didn't even have to look her in the face. One of those thugs would brag to whoever would listen. He hadn't had to do anything apart from put up with her wandering hands and let himself be licked by a mouth that was also like a shadow, poking in and out from behind the scratchy, grubby fabric that veiled her face. She only ever lifted it when strictly necessary, and even then only a fraction, never fully revealing herself, a detail for which they were grateful. Just as they were grateful for the absolute silence of the whole act, no moaning or sighing, no distractions or words of any sort, just flesh on flesh and a lick of saliva in the murky gloom of that kitchen, or down one of the hallways decorated with images of naked women with their paper eyes scratched out,